We are here as men of peace, but we are here also to declare our full and forthright support of what is in great measure a military alliance.
But in the background is a much wider and more suggestive question connected with the fact that Canada seems to have moved from a pre-national to a post-national phase of existence without ever having been a nation.
That bigness and complexity are functions not so much of numbers as of ideas.
We built a country, east and west and north. We built it on an infrastructure that deliberately resisted the continental pressure of the United States. For 120 years we've done it with one signature of a pen. You've reversed that, thrown us into the north-south influence of the United States.
Hello and welcome to the 11th episode of the podcast of the Red Ensign, a podcast about Canada, a people, not Canada, a post-national state. I'm here with Daniel Tyrie of the Dominion Society, the recently formed Dominion Society. Many of you have asked me about the Dominion Society, seen it on Twitter, whatever. They made quite a splash in the kind of online right world in their first couple of weeks of existence. And I thought it would be well worth everybody's time to do a deeper dive behind and look at the people behind it, look at the Dominion Society's goals, and what we can or should do to support its collective goals. Welcome, Daniel.
Thanks for having me on, Black Horse.
So for the sake of my audience, do you want to give me, I don't actually know much about you prior to the Dominion Society. Do you want to give the audience kind of a thumbnail sketch of who you are, where you come from, why the Dominion Society, and who some of your partners there might be?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background before the Dominion Society was directly in politics. I studied political science and economics at the University of Waterloo. I grew up in Toronto before that. And right after university in 2018, I got involved in the People's Party of Canada at the local area, in the local area I was living at the time in Kitchener-Waterloo. And I quickly got involved right in the head office of the organization. I ended up moving down to Ottawa and volunteering at headquarters and actually getting hired full-time by the party. And after the 2019 election, I took over as executive director of the party. So I was kind of the head staffer of the People's Party of Canada from late 2019 until May 2024, about a year ago, when we decided to part ways as a result of some differences in outlook on messaging and policy and operations. So for the last year, I've been trying to sort out what to do next. I still found I had a big drive to get involved at a civic level and change the country in the direction that I think we need to go. And as such, I started kind of developing this project, the Dominion Society. The main issue that I've always been passionate about, what drove me to get involved in the PPC in the first place, was mass immigration. And since 2018, since 2019, when I first got involved, the issue's only gotten more and more important as immigration numbers just continued to climb, aggravating all the major issues in our society. So I founded the Dominion Society. I've been working with two partners right now, Greg Wycliffe and Ken Jones. The three of us make up the founding board of the Dominion Society. We're a federally incorporated not-for-profit organization. We just launched literally a week ago. Last Monday was our official launch date. And things are going pretty well so far. We're growing pretty fast. We made a bit of a splash on online. The media is ignoring us like the plague, but that's to be expected. And we're already seeing lots of people follow our channels, sign up as paid members, and are eager to get involved in starting to promote our ideas in their own communities.
Yeah, thank you for that intro. Selfishly, I want to take a minute, and I didn't realize that you were that deeply involved with the People's Party of Canada. And ever since the federal election, I have been desperately trying to get somebody from the world of the People's Party of Canada to honestly answer questions about the future of that project and why. I mean, I was pretty what they think the future of that project is and how they plan to get there, how they plan to overcome the kind of systemic difficulties that a party like the PPC faces. And I've gotten lots of what I would call non-answers, answers that don't address the fundamental obstacles that a party like that faces, that I think everybody in the PPC at this point either does or should understand a party like that faces. Tell me a little bit about your time there and why you left and what you think about that project in the future.
Well, I have a lot of belief in the kind of general concept of the PPC. I think it is important to like our political landscape to have some sort of more right-wing option to balance out the kind of political landscape. But I don't think that the organization has executed very well on that. I always had a lot of faith. Like I got involved at the start because I saw it as a big opportunity for kind of the younger generation to put our stamp on the political landscape. I never really had like a huge faith in Maxime Bernier as a leader and some of his kind of hallmark ideas, but I saw the kind of Conservative Party as, entrenched and difficult to change, and the PPC as a big opportunity. So I got involved very much in there. As you pointed out, there's a litany of roadblocks that small parties kind of face in Canada. It's very difficult to get started. Just like on a basic level, Canada is a difficult country to operate in just because we have such a sparse population across such a big land mass, which just obviously offers like logistical issues for doing anything. But then as well, there's all sorts of like the media blackout, the way that financial support is operated benefits the big parties. Like if you get above certain thresholds at the national level, at the local level, you get 50 to 60% of your campaign funds back. But if you do poorly, then that money just goes down the drain. So there's a lot of things that kind of benefit the entrenched parties at the risk of smaller parties. So it is a hard thing to do. Like I don't regret my time in the PPC. I'm disappointed to see where they are now. I'm disappointed with how things ended. But I learned a lot, what to do, what not to do while I was in that organization. And I plan to bring that to the Dominion Society.
Well, there's a really important point that was touched on the way through there. Canada does not have a media ecosystem which is comparable to that of the United States, right? It has a media infrastructure that has three parts. It has official state media, which is extremely committed to it's extremely committed to the 100-year progressive project that has been associated with the Laurentian elite in this country. And it is extremely committed to not acknowledging that opposition to that narrative even exists. So you will not, if you interrogate state media, Radio-Canada in Quebec is maybe a bit of a different thing, but if you interrogate state media in English Canada, there's no acknowledgement that dissent against the kind of Laurentian progressive consensus exists or is legitimate. It then has a second media ecosystem, which people will often call kind of the legacy private media. Most of these media elements have historically represented particular parties in the country, There's the Toronto Star. There's the Globe and Mail. Most people don't know this, but the Globe and Mail was actually founded by the founder of the Liberal Party of Canada. So again, not a surprise, the set of interests that it represents. Then you have the National Post, which seems to have taken upon itself to be the mouthpiece of Canada's Western elite. You'll see a set of opinions voiced there that are a little bit different. But again, it's voicing the interests of a particular class that have a vehicle in politics. It's not media that is in any way separated from power.
Yeah, and even to separate them from the state media is increasingly difficult
Well,
since 2017.
This is the other point I was going to get to. These are not officially state media outlets, but they're very, very heavily subsidized by the state. I think recent figures suggest as much as 40% of their media staff budget comes from the government of Canada and comes contingent upon the editorial line of the publication falling within the standards associated, the standards outlined for that subsidy. So very heavily subsidized, very heavily implicitly subsidized with Canadian content regulations. So when the government of Canada faces off with people like Facebook and Twitter over making sure that they promote sufficient Canadian content in the country, they have Postmedia in mind, they have CBC in mind. They do not have you and me in mind in terms of subsidizing Canadian content. And so you have this kind of outer layer of semi-state media that dominates discussion of Canada. And then you have the third tier of media, which is an interesting collection. You have rebel media, you have groups of people online, and you have the kind of the international press, which is often interested in covering Canada in the context of its domestic problems. So like I know Oren McIntyre pretty well down at the Blaze, but every time the Blaze covers Canada, they cover it in the context of the factional political fight that's going on between red and blue in America. It's not detailed coverage of Canadian politics in its own terms. And I think Rebel News is like that as well, and a significant fraction of the online influencer class, because their money comes out of America. The red versus blue fight in America dominates the way they discuss Canadian politics. And so you have three layers of media talking about Canadian politics. Two layers are dominated by power interests in Canada, and a third layer is heavily influenced by power interests in the United States. So it's a tough environment to cut through. And when I've spoken to people at the People's Party of Canada, I've heard no strategy from them except Maxime Bernier's personal brand and talking about untouchable topics to kind of cut through that blockade of speaking honestly about Canada. What do you think about that structure? What do you think about the Dominion Society? What do you think about the ability to cut through that blockade?
Well, I think one of the big problems of what the kind of PPC has turned into is they don't really offer a significant, coherent, philosophical vision for the country, worldview in general. They very much have just turned into a general kind of grievance party. They talk about gender ideology and climate change and immigration, but they're focused on all these kind of things that they feel that aren't spoken to enough. But it's become just kind of an angry hodgepodge of issues without a significant driving force. And I think it makes it difficult for people to understand what they're all about and even to get behind them, because if they care about one issue, they might be offended by another issue.
I think that's
kind of underpinned by Bernier's kind of philosophical libertarianism, which is at odds with the kind of general philosophy of Canadians. So it's kind of a weird Frankenstein monster at this point. if you ask me.
Well, I think you touched on an interesting point here. There's some like deep inherent contradictions in the PPC base over the question of what is a Canadian, right? So they made a big splash by opposing mass immigration, but I think it would be very, very difficult for that party to talk about remigration, because if you look at its candidates and membership, a lot of the people that hold these grievances against the Canadian government are not part of the historical nations that made up Canada for its first 200 years of existence.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a big post that went kind of viral during the last election. I'll see if I can pull it up. But like Bernier did a big announcement on immigration at some point, and he did it in Brampton, standing beside his Hindu candidate in front of a sign with the Hindu candidate's face blown up, and it was just like a bizarre optics example of optics, and like it kind of speaks to a lot of the issues with the PPC. Like they just struggled to put forward a coherent message on all levels. I'll send this tweet to the chat if you want to pull it up.
Sure.
It just is bizarre, and yeah, like they're very much, people call them a nationalist party. They don't call themselves a nationalist party. And they certainly don't adhere to any sort of concept of authentic nationalism. They definitely would fall more into the basket of civic nationalists. They do advocate for some ideas that I would include in the umbrella of remigration. Like they do talk about deporting illegals and stuff. Their immigration policy is definitely better than what the other parties offer, but they don't approach it in a way that I think really resonates with the average people.
Well,
which is what I'm trying to add to the kind of political discourse through the
well,
debates.
I think at a very basic level, a lot of the grievances that we've discussed that the PPC is trying to represent are legitimate grievances.
Yeah.
The issue is having legitimate grievances is not the same thing as having an affirmative program to use power properly, or even an affirmative program that's going to hold together as you kind of scale up. So in some ways, the worst thing that could happen to the PPC is they could get like 14% of the vote, and then all of the internal contradictions start to come out, right?
Yeah. I think they would have a massive problem if they like. I don't think, like, even if they got people elected, I think that would be just a new barrel of monkeys. They'd suffer from all sorts of further problems, and
especially if they got
their
somebody.
whole worldview is very negative, right? We reject climate change, and we reject immigration, and we reject gender ideology, and we reject this and that, and I think that's very tiring, and I think it highlights a lot of what people are generally frustrated by in politics. I think what really is successful, even when it's done on a very surface level, is being, for something. And I think this is like on a very simple level, something that the Liberal Party does better than the other options. And I think the PPC probably is the worst counterexample of it. But I think it's even something that the Conservatives struggle with, as they're just like perennially stuck in opposition. They get kind of stuck in this kind of negative loop or identity, which people are less interested in.
Yeah, that's interesting. So that actually answers one of the key questions that I wanted to ask you. What led you to form the Dominion Society? I guess the Dominion Society is intended to be something of an answer to the kind of deep internal contradictions and the difficulty with negative messaging that you perceive inside the PPC. Is that correct? Yeah,
I mean, I mentioned earlier that I bring with myself a lot of knowledge of what I learned from the shortcomings and successes from within the PPC, and this is definitely something that informs my strategic outlook going forward. So we definitely want to bring a more positive and cohesive worldview for how we see the country. And I would in a word, I would describe that as nationalism.
Okay, and then when I look at what you've done with the Dominion Society, you've not gone out and started a political party. Instead, you've done something else. Tell me what you expect to accomplish here, why you've done it this way as opposed to any other way, and why you think this is the best strategy at this stage in Canada's political history.
Yeah, that's a great question. As we mentioned, small political parties have a difficult time establishing themselves in the Canadian context for reasons that we've already mentioned. I think one of the big struggles of the PPC was they kind of spread themselves too thin, too fast, which created all sorts of kind of structural level at the organizational level. They wanted to be everywhere, and as a result, they had to lower standards and they had candidates that didn't represent the party well, and so on, which as a result didn't grow the party. It turned a lot of people off. So I didn't want to just jump in and start a new political party that was just going to compete with all the other ones. As an alternative, I kind of drew inspiration from some other Canadian advocacy groups and advocacy groups that I've seen abroad to kind of take a new approach to how we can influence politics. I see in Canada that all kind of foreign ethnic groups are organized and politically active and acting as voting blocks. And as a result, we see Canadian politicians show up and pander to these groups and, put on their headdresses and take off their shoes and walk through their churches and all these things in an attempt to win over their support. Whereas kind of heritage Canadians, real Canadians we remain atomized, and as a result, we're kind of much more easy to ignore. So I wanted to organize Canadians along. I wanted to organize heritage Canadians into a cohesive voting bloc to be more influential and to exert power on all parties. I see that this kind of nationalist worldview, this concept of remigration, as something that appeals across the political spectrum because it impacts so many other issues. And the Dominion Society, we don't put forward ideas on the economy. We don't put forward ideas on issues like climate change. We push forward a nationalist worldview of our country. We are the main issue we're focused on is immigration. If you agree with us, if you want your political party to start advocating for ideas along these lines, come and join us, and we'll continue to kind of push the ball forward, normalizing this issue and making it so that all parties have to adjust to this issue. Because we've seen poll after poll, Canadians, even immigrants living in Canada, are rejecting the mass immigration consensus, so-called consensus. And even there's polls showing that there's increased support for mass deportations. And I think this is a big opportunity. And I think support for remigration could be very high, but it's a concept that the average Canadian is just not familiar with. So through our activism, we want to promote this idea and normalize it as an option. There's so many people that are just black-pilled that know what mass immigration is a problem, but they just feel like their country's already lost. And I want to tell those people, like, no, these people were brought here quickly by politicians. They can leave just as fast through the same political powers. The idea is remigration. Here we have a 10-step, 3-phase plan of how we would achieve it and how we would kind of reverse the trends of mass immigration that have, I would say, have been going on for about the last 40 years, but it definitely were flipped into overdrive since 2015 under Justin Trudeau. Yeah,
okay. There's a number of things in that answer that I want to access. How do we do this properly? Okay, so you started an advocacy group. On this channel, we've discussed the way that advocacy groups of various kinds interface with Canadian politics. And broadly, there are two categories of effective advocacy groups in Canadian politics. There are voting bloc advocacy groups, and there are policy advocacy groups, both of which have a long history of being quite effective at getting their ideas pushed into Canadian politics. And I'll provide an example of each, and then we can come back to it. So example A is a group that I'm quite familiar with, the Century Initiative. I know a number of members of the Century Initiative personally. People have spoken there, for better and for worse. So the Century Initiative is an advocacy group whose expressed goal is to take Canada to a population of 100 million by 2100. They've got a whole collection of reasons why they think this is a good idea, and the primary mechanism through which they intend to take the country to a population of 100 million is mass migration, right? The Century Initiative never motivated a single voter to get out the door. The Century Initiative has had a tremendous policy success despite having no voters attached to it. And it's had that policy success through a couple of mechanisms. One is having pre-packaged policy solutions that a political party on entering office can simply pick up, send down to the civil service, and execute, lock and load. The second is that it has been able to very effectively appeal to the self-interest of of elements of the Canadian elite in the civil service, in business, and in politics, in order to convince them that the set of ideas that it's putting forward are in their interests. It's been extremely effective in the Canadian business elite at convincing them that mass migration is in their self-interests. It's been extremely effective in Ottawa with politicians, particularly at the cabinet level, convincing them that mass migration, and to a lesser extent, efforts to ease the birth rate decline, are essential to assuring the power and privilege of their position. So that's one category of advocacy group. The other category of advocacy group is the kind you kind of hinted at in your discussion, which are vote block advocacy groups. So you see this every time there's an election that involves Ontario. You see Doug Ford, who I think personally believes absolutely nothing besides maybe he believes in beer, show up at a Sikh temple and some Hindu festival and God only knows what else, to tell them how much he's a relatable guy and supports your culture or whatever. And if Doug Ford gets into office, he's going to be on your side. And that's another road of kind of, and the reason he does that is because the groups of people in question there all vote together as chunks. And the reason he doesn't show up at Anglican churches is because people in Anglican churches don't vote as chunks. So if you show up there, you're not going to, there's no 20,000 votes that go with showing up there. But there is if you show up at the right set of Sikh temples or Hindu temples or whatever, right? So when you think about the Dominion Society, which of these two visions do you kind of have in mind, and why?
That's a great question. And I kind of see the Dominion Society as an intersection of both. So we have prepared a 10-step kind of 3-phase plan. You can find it right on our website on the What is Remigration page, near the bottom. It's just a basic summary on our page, but we plan to kind of elaborate this into white papers and a more clear policy outline that could be adopted, or pieces of which could be adopted by governments at the provincial and the federal level. So we are working on that side of things, but we also want to organize a voting bloc and engage in activism to normalize these ideas at a grassroots level. We want to train the next generation of activists. I want it to be a situation where there are volunteers, the best volunteers for different candidates in different parties in the same riding that are all Dominion Society members. I want it to be that when there are nomination contests or leadership contests or whenever candidates are being selected, that they know that there are hundreds of Dominion Society members in their ridings that they have to be aware of and keep on side, because we're going to get involved in those kind of contests to try and influence them and tilt them in line with our vision for things. So
can I
we're
interject?
trying to be active on kind of both sides of the spectrum, having the ideas to provide directly to the politicians while also putting pressure from the bottom up.
Yeah. So can I interject here for a second?
Absolutely.
So I have here on the screen the Dominion Society's website. You should all go and have a look at it. You got your lovely 10-step program here where you're discussing what the steps would be to remigrate people and then reestablish your vision for kind of what I would call Canadian national policy. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but I want to just highlight the media approach here and what the implications of it are. So if you look at the section above, Canada's immigration disaster, this is really where you're making your elevator pitch for why mass migration should stop and, in your view, be reversed. And if I look at the things that you're highlighting as the negative consequences of mass migration, you've got stagnating wages, unemployment, overwhelmed healthcare, the poor quality of the education system, and skyrocketing housing costs. All of these are fundamentally populist concerns, right? If I look at the profile of people who care about stagnating wages, that's not Canada's business elite. In their view, stagnating wages are a feature and not a cost. Moderate unemployment is a feature and not a cost. And the overwhelmed healthcare system is really not their problem. And skyrocketing housing costs, again, increases in asset prices for them are a feature and not a cost. This is true for the business elite. This is true for the group of people presently in government for the most part. And it's certainly true for the upper level of the civil service. So the media strategy that I've seen to this point is fundamentally a populist strategy targeting Canadians who are either feel culturally dispossessed by mass migration or are suffering from the negative material consequences, particularly to the middle and working class, particularly to younger people. That really looks to me like who you're targeting. Is that correct?
I would say that's accurate, yeah.
And then, so the second piece of that question is, it's obvious to me how the Dominion Society would then leverage that group of people and make the kind of implicit organizational comment that to the extent to which you do things that the Dominion Society likes, we'll try to mobilize these voters on your behalf, and the extent to which you do things the Dominion Society doesn't like, we'll mobilize them against you. So pretty straightforward pitch along the lines of ethnic bloc, vote bloc advocacy groups that already exist. Mm-hmm. What I don't see in any of your literature really is, other than the fact that there's prepackaged policy to tell you what to do to turn mass migration around, I don't see any carrots built into your literature that says this is why mass migration is going to help the people who actually today control the levers of power. Is that really correct?
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that perspective, and like, let's not be naive. Like, there's a reason that mass immigration has been overwhelming the Western world. It's not because it benefits no one. It definitely benefits those in the hall of power. As you said, every single one of these negative consequences can be spun as a positive for a small elite. The reality is it's negatively impacting the country at large. Finding ways to in arguments that would appeal to those elite circles, beyond the obvious kind of cultural impacts it's having on our society, which I think can appeal to anyone. I guess less those people that are hidden in up in Muskoka and in gated communities or whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, let me paint an alternate picture for you for a moment.
Absolutely.
So in my real life, I spend quite a lot of time with people who would style themselves as members of Canada's Laurentian elite, whether it's true or not. I kind of, I spend time with people who are major donors to the Liberal Party, who are kind of part of Canada's business elite for various reasons. All of these people are, if you look at Mark Carney's campaign, they're all quite concerned that Canada as a political vehicle is becoming fragile. And I think they're correct to be concerned about this. And it's becoming fragile for a number of reasons. There are regional tensions that are quite severe right at the moment because of, fundamentally, the inflammation of regional tensions is what led to the end of Justin Trudeau's political career, right? Within the Liberal Party, the fact that Justin Trudeau had reignited Western separatism and had inflamed tensions in Quebec was a political disaster inside his own coalition and inside the people who kind of run that part of Canada. I think there's a pretty straightforward pitch to be made to Canada's elite class that the consequences of mass migration are coming for them in a whole bunch of very significant ways. And that one of the consequences to mass migration is the collapse of the human capital of Canada's workforce as the entire university system gets repurposed as a kind of visa mill, basically.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I think I kind of alluded to that with the general cultural concerns and the tensions rising between this multicultural experiment. But I appreciate that framing of things. I think you're correct. We have been focused on a more populist message, but tempering that with the elite perspective, I agree is important.
Okay, there's a couple of other things I want to talk about with respect to the Dominion Society and its choices. I think I'd like to get to the question of the Dominion Society's view of Canadian nationalism. And then after that, I want to pan out and look at why mass migration and remigration were chosen as kind of the cornerstone here. So if I look at your website, there's a page on your website dedicated to what is a Canadian. And I think it's very appropriate that there is, because there's no such thing as Canadian nationalism without answering that question. Mm-hmm. So do you want to kind of give me the affirmative view that the Dominion Society has for what is a Canadian and what Canadian nationalism kind of means in your kind of instantiation of it?
Yeah, absolutely. To even justify a concept like remigration, I think you need to embed yourself in a foundation of nationalism. And when we say nationalism, we're not talking about some sort of general patriotism or civic nationalism. We're talking about, an authentic definition of the word, a recognition that Canada is not just a set of ideas. We're not just a set of boundaries with an economy. Canadians aren't just interchangeable economic units. That Canadian Canadians are a people, a distinct people with a unique history and a shared identity. And I think that history bears this out. There's a lot of, we do live in this kind of post-nationalist era, especially in, since Pierre Trudeau, where they've pushed this kind of multicultural society, where we grow up learning about concepts like the cultural mosaic, the famous Trudeau Juniorism, a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian, all these things to kind of undermine what it means to be a Canadian. But if you actually read our history, it's pretty obvious that there is a fascinating and unique history, and I do believe that that Canada is a synthesis of a few major European ethnic groups, mainly the English and the English and the French, but also the Irish and the Scottish, and subsequently some additional waves of European migration, particularly in Western Canada. But that these groups underwent an ethnogenesis to form two kind of unique and distinct ethnic groups, English Canadians and French Canadians, and that it's a great disrespect to our ancestors to just refer to these people as immigrants. Like these people are settlers. They're very different than modern immigrants. They came to a land that was completely undeveloped. It was hostile and very difficult to live here. And they carved a great civilization out of the wilderness. And they did so. They risked everything to do so, to pass something prosperous and safe onto future generations, their descendants. They didn't they didn't create this country with the idea that they were immigrants and anyone from anywhere could come here. And we saw that through generations of government policy that looked to protect that identity from being transformed by mass migration. And then that started getting unraveled in the 60s, and then very rapidly in more recent years.
So there's a couple of things that I want to make sure that we get square on the way through here. So you made, I think, what is a very apt case, the distinction between the settlers that came to Canada and built the nation essentially out of nothing. My ancestors came to this country in the 1780s after the American Revolutionary War as loyalists. A parcel of land was bought by the crown in what is not now Ontario from the Massasauga tribe, and given to them. And at the time, it was a completely uninhabited wilderness, full of essentially virgin wilderness. And it was carved into essentially a little England over the course of the 19th century by men and women like them. Before Canada was anything but a word on a map, they were of British extraction. They were English Canadians. And I think you've kind of correctly identified two ethnoses that were formed during this period. I mean, the French Canadian ethnos may be a little bit older and dates to the conquest of the colony in the mid 17th century. But these people came to an empty land and built a people. They built a physical infrastructure. They built like a nation out of nothing. To a lesser extent, if you look at some of the post-war migrants, post-World War II, there were a lot of displaced persons in Europe. Even and in the late 19th century, there were a few Eastern European, well, not a few. There was some migration from Eastern Europe to Western and Canada, and it was done along the same basis. When the Dutch came to Canada after the Second World War, they were required to participate in agriculture and settle land as a condition of coming to the country. What they didn't do is come to Canada's major urban centers and have, I mean, in the last episode, I covered a remigration plan or a migration plan from the current Liberal government that offers 12 months of income support to new migrants, as well as a settlement advisor to kind of help them get located in urban Canada and get on all the appropriate benefits plans so that they can not work and come to this country and enjoy the fruits of the land. As opposed to my ancestors who came to a frozen wilderness and carved their farm out of nothing. And so when I think about migration, my first question is about contribution. There's an argument that says Canada is an underdeveloped country. There's lots of parts of it that are essentially empty. And, maybe you could make a case that some of the people who would like to come to Canada from elsewhere, maybe if they went to northern Manitoba and transformed the moose pasture that is up there into something of real value, maybe that there's a real case for doing that. But that's completely different than mass migration as it has occurred basically since Trudeau the Elder constituted the project.
Yeah, and I think you make some great points. I've gotten a bit of flack for being too narrowly focused on the English, French, Scottish, Irish roots. I do quickly say that later generations of Europeans also integrated into the Canadian
Well, I mean, at a
project.
basic level, if you look at Canada's population, about 40% of the population is descended from either French Canadians or Loyalists, or sort of the early 19th century wave of Anglo migrants, both from the U.S. and from Great Britain. About 20% of Canada's population comes from the later European waves of migration in the early 19th and in the late 19th and early 20th century. These are the Eastern European migrants, some Southern European migrants, most of whom ultimately went home, but some did actually stay. And particularly, a lot of these were also migrants by way of America, many of whom ended up in Western Canada. And then a further 40% of the population, as of when I last looked into it, 40% of the permanent population of Canada traces its lineage to the post 1960 migration. I think all three of those groups have fundamentally distinct histories, and trying to draw a single nation out of them is a single nation, a single advocacy group out of A and B is. I think you're better off to have a more cohesive starting block, knowing that the political entity called Canada is probably not going to eject everyone in the latter two groups. And yet the cultural lines, even like I've got, there's some Dutch in my extended family, but the cultural lines between Anglo-Canadians of that descent and Canadians of other European descents that came later, or French Canadians and Canadians of European descent who came later, are quite substantial. I don't. Maybe they have a common interest in ending mass migration because it's so destructive to the country, but it's not like it's a different affirmative vision.
Yeah. Well, my point was simply that there are subsequent groups that came to this country even post Confederation, especially in Western Canada, particularly Germans, Dutch, who came here in pretty significant numbers and played a large role in settling the country in Western Canada, in particular, in some of the more northern aspects of Ontario, and also integrated and intermarried with the Canadian base, the British Isles, mostly in English Canada, to meld into the Canadian kind of identity. It's so.
So
While
we're getting a
it
little bit off
go
track
far
here.
deeper than a confederation, I would say there is a larger kind of Canadian identity that people have been a bit sensitive around. But
Yeah, I mean, we're getting a bit off track here, but the point I wanted to draw out is if I look at your website, it's a one Canada vision of Canadian nationalism, but it's a one Canada, more than one people vision, right? So when you talk to Canadian nationalists, there are a number of flavors. One flavor takes the view that there's an ethnogenesis that crosses the French-English divide. This is not that flavor. This is the flavor that Canada is a political union that crosses this divide of more than one ethnos. Is that right?
well, yes. Simply put, yes. I would say that there is a lot in common between the English, the Anglo Canadian, and the French Canadian. Like there were significant uh, English populations in French Canada that intermarried, especially in elite circles. And even to go further, most of the French settlers were from northern France, Normandy, which also has similar ethnic roots to much of England. So there is a lot of overlap in the Anglo and French Canadian groups, but I would still characterize it as a marriage between two groups.
Well, and this is quite an important point because in a hypothetical nationalist utopia where Canada is freed from the iron boot of the Laurentian elite, and Daniel Tyrie is in charge of the nation, the cultures which form the foundation of the country are to be celebrated and positively affirmed. And in order to do that, you're either positively affirming a view of Canada that views it as a single people with a single culture, or you're affirming a view of it. I mean, if you look at the historical symbols of the country, the red ensign as a good example, in many of those historical symbols, there's this idea that the multifaceted nature of the Canadian identity is to be celebrated. It's an asset of our people.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's something that I'm proud of, especially like the general bicultural, bilingual identity of Canada. I think is important. I, I shared some pro Quebec content at the end of last week, just saying that English Canada should take more out of Quebec's book when it comes to protecting our identity, and I proposed we adapt some of Quebec's laws around public signage and religious symbols.
Yes, I think that might be very reasonable.
And I thought it was a pretty reasonable proposal, like where I'm taking laws that are literally exist within Canada and proposing them on the national level, and people were a bit sensitive to that. There is definitely an anti-Quebec reflex in some right-wing or nationalist circles, and I understand why. But I think that any kind of positive and productive vision of nationalism cannot be exclusionary of Quebec. It has to, very much in the vein of John A. Macdonald and George Etienne Cartier. We have to kind of hold hands and reject this further kind of multicultural vision and put our foot down. We are a kind of bicultural nation, country, state, and we have to draw the line.
Yeah, no, I think any vision of Canada from a nationalist point of view that doesn't both celebrate Quebec's historic existence as a nation and English Canada's historic existence as a nation is kind of dead on arrival. Because anyways, we could have a whole podcast discussing that. It's not the purpose of today's discussion.
Yeah, I can come back.
Yeah, so we talked about the vision of nationalism that exists within the Dominion Society. We talked about the strategy of a pressure group rather than a political party. The last kind of question this may be obvious to my audience, but I think it's important for you to kind of express yourself as to why. Canada is a country that faces a lot of problems. Mass migration is, you've chosen to make the focus of the Dominion Society mass migration and the cultural dilution of the country. Why, in your mind, is that the most fundamental of the problems Canada faces, the most important, the one you've chosen to kind of dedicate your time and energy to?
Yeah. So I latched onto this issue during my university years, and I was going through university during the rise of Trump, when immigration or criticism of mass migration started to become a more normal and a larger conversation piece. And at first I was very reflexively like anti-Trump, as most people were programmed to be. But then I started noticing that he had a point. And I could connect every kind of major issue that I could see in the country. It all kind of kept relating back to immigration, the education system, the healthcare system, stagnating wages, increasing housing prices and rents. It all just kept tracking back to immigration. And even though this was such an obvious problem and something that the government could so easily, the federal government could so easily fix, it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And this is that from 2018 to now. So it was just so absurd to me that people were so uncomfortable to talk about this issue, despite it being like so obviously a major driving force between all of Canada's issues. But at this point, it's also, as a nationalist, I can't see how any other issue matters, because again, it's not about being vaguely patriotic. It's about accepting and basing the foundation of our worldview around this concept that a nation is a people. And immigration, regardless of the levels, has an impact on that nation. We've seen how our country has been able to has started to kind of transform as the social fabric has changed. You can look at areas like Surrey and Brampton, where large scale, like they've gone from being a minority to the majority in the last like 30 years. And now those areas are like foreign countries. Like, you can't replace a people without fundamentally transforming the country. So while I kind of started down the rabbit hole as a result of kind of the top level kind of economic issues, which are still incredibly important, don't get me wrong, I just fundamentally am very apprehensive of immigration in general. I believe it can be used responsibly and can be necessary in very specific situations. But I think the cultural identity needs to be protected, just philosophically, kind of as a responsibility, as a duty to our ancestors, and to our descendants, to pass on that country that was given to us. So that's why we're completely focused on this issue. Like, I feel like nothing else matters if we just let our country slip away from us and transform into something else. Like, I don't see how climate change or whatever matters unless we can protect our country and preserve it for the future.
This is a very important point. So I'm a little bit older than you, and so I can remember all the way back to 2005 when the Harper government was making the argument that migration was the answer to Canada's economic problems. And I couldn't help but think at the time that whether or not Canada's economic problems get answered is kind of irrelevant if the resulting nation is handed not to our descendants, but to somebody else's descendants.
Mm.
And so, regardless of the other questions, and there are a whole other set of policy concerns that track back to migration. We can talk about them a little bit, but at a very fundamental level, if the country is handed to somebody else's children instead of your own children, then it doesn't matter if you've solved the other problems.
Yeah, it's a moral failing. It's not a question of economics or other metrics. Like it's just fundamentally wrong.
And so the fact that mass migration has, as it turned out, become a huge economic drain on the country, I really think that's a poor framing of the issue. Passing the country from one generation to another generation to another generation into the far future is a moral duty that precedes these kind of economic questions that follow it. Maybe it would be different if we were at an economic level where we were facing mass starvation or something, but within the bounds of the level of prosperity Canada has known, I don't see that the economic I see the economic argument as a lever, but not the fundamental basis not the fundamental basis on which opposition to mass migration should rest.
Yeah, I completely agree, and that's why this is kind of an essential part of our message and the kind of worldview that we want to promote and normalize within the general political conversation. I think the economic arguments are important and relevant, and some people need to hear them. But like fundamentally, I think the most important thing that resonates with people is that idea that there is a kind of moral responsibility to pass the country on to future generations, a moral responsibility to our ancestors and to our descendants. So that's really what we build everything around.
Okay, so we're running short on time, but there's one other fundamental question that I want to get to. There are a couple of other sort of policy questions that I think kind of exist in the background. One of the things that's happened during the political career of Trudeau the Younger has been the transition from points-based legal migration to legal migration of permanent people to this huge number of temporary foreign workers, a significantly larger number of illegal migrants to Canada. Illegal immigrants to Canada were fundamentally unheard of until
we have a pretty good geography to avoid that, or so we thought.
Yeah, until most illegal migrants come here through legal channels and just overstay their visas.
Yeah.
So those are some issues that I think the Dominion Society has kind of addressed in their policy proposals, for better and for worse. But the last kind of thing that I really want to get out to my audience. So you said that the Dominion Society has so far recruited something like 200 paying members. Is that correct?
Yeah, over that now. We're heading towards 300 quickly.
Yes. So in a hypothetical world where the Dominion Society is wildly successful in its campaign to get out members and raise some funds, first of all, the funding strategy is to get members and to have members pay. Is that correct?
Yeah, and well, I mean, beyond membership fees, we also can accept donations of any level. We can even receive donations from international sources, individuals, corporations. Legally speaking, we can accept a wide variety of funds.
But putting the legal
we generally focused on more of a grassroots approach.
Yeah, it's a grassroots fundraising strategy. Is that correct?
Yeah. So
Okay.
I when I was working for the PPC, I actually ran fundraising for the organization for the last 2 or 3 years of my contract, during which I raised, personally raised millions of dollars, focusing mostly on email and social media fundraising. So I do have a background in that area, and I'll be bringing that experience to the Dominion Society.
Yeah. So assume for a moment the Dominion Society is wildly successful in its grassroots fundraising efforts, and by the end of the year, you've got $1 million in annual revenue, maybe $2 million in annual revenue. What do you plan to do with that?
Well, for like on a basic, we're dumping into grassroots activism very quickly. Just as small scale examples, we're gonna have we're already working on developing kind of basic print materials, stickers, posters, flyers, and engaging with our members to form teams of volunteers to get these up in communities all over the place. We've also been consistently kind of putting out a wide variety of kind of professional grade content in the form of short form video, graphics, social media posts, to consistently drip out kind of strong messaging to further kind of normalize these ideas. We want to be able to host professional conferences to further kind of share these ideas. We really want to be able to kind of build a professional core, a team that can work around the clock to use all these different levers to get to make sure that as many Canadians as possible are aware of the word remigration and understand what it means, and that it's an option to kind of create the foundation for more aggressive kind of political activism on top of that. So that is the kind of basic outlook at what things are, what we're working towards. We see this across the left has so many professional charities and NGOs and stuff, stabs of over like hundreds of people that are working to normalize their worldview every single day. And the right has, a handful, and they're mostly libertarian in character. This is something completely different in the Canadian political spectrum. So we want to kind of use the tools and the framework of what we've seen from the left and bring it to nationalism.
Okay, so it's fundamentally a media strategy. So if you raise money, you're going to hire people and buy media to deliver the fundamental message that mass migration is bad and that remigration should occur, and that remigration can occur using what I think are quite simple policy steps, right? It's not a highly complex policy question how you remigrate people. It's actually a pretty straightforward policy question how you remigrate people. The strategy from the Dominion Society is to assemble a voting bloc and to produce media designed to press the issue. Is that correct?
I think that's an accurate summary.
Okay. And again, the strategy here is fundamentally a populist strategy. Deliver the message widely and deliver the message in a way that travels across the social media ecosystem well, so that you can kind of cut through the media blockade. Is that correct?
Yeah. It's definitely more of a grassroots approach. As we establish a base, we'll look to kind of wield that base from a more top-down perspective, but it's fundamentally populist.
Right. Okay. And then, okay, so that's basic. The basic question here is, you're assembling a populist organization. You're not building a think tank. Is kind of the conclusion.
Well, as I said, we do want to flesh out our plan and prepare professional white papers and stuff that can be provided to federal and provincial governments as these ideas become more mainstream. But I wouldn't really characterize us as a think tank.
Yeah. Okay. Understood. Well, we're running up here on time. Is there anything else that you would like to present to the audience before we cut it?
No, just I would encourage people to check out our social media channels. You can find us all over the place. Our handle is @dominionsociety, SOC at the end. To check out our website, dominionsociety.ca. If you like what you heard today, like, please check out sign up as a member. If you're interested in supporting us financially or getting involved, you can find the page easily on our website. That's my main message. If you can come out, and we need to grow our numbers to have impact and to spread these ideas across the country. So visit our website and sign up if you're interested.
Well, thank you very much, Daniel, for your time and attention, and I wish you the best of luck in your efforts.
Thanks for having me on. It was a fun discussion.
Canada originally was put together by two groups of people who didn't have much in common but didn't want to be American.
The line just popped into my head. A bunch of the boys was a-whooping it up. And there I got my start.
We have had a flag. Flags can be changed. But flags cannot be imposed, the sacred symbols of a people's hopes and aspirations, by the simple, capricious, personal choice of a Prime Minister of Canada.
I have watched this country for half of my life from abroad, and we have turned complacency into just that, a national sport.
I am resolutely opposed to all innovation, all change, but I am determined to understand what's happening. I don't choose just to sit and let the juggernaut roll over me.